Mildred Loving instilled hope in the LGBT plus community with this famous quote: "I am still not a political person, but I am proud that Richard's and my name is on a court case that can help reinforce the love, the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what loving and loving are all about." Supporters of gay marriage have repeatedly used this for legal arguments for legalizing same-sex marriage in America. Marriage may have been changing over the years today, however the love between people remains timeless. The Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court case of 1967 brought national attention to the social distinction still occurring after the Civil Rights Act of 1967. Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving took a stand against laws prohibiting them from marrying, ultimately causing a change in racial oppression during the time.
The Greensboro sit-in in 1960 occurred because 4 black students sat in a white-only section and were not served. The people's response was to stage a sit-in that is often considered the beginning of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The movement quickly spreads across the country and is eventually successful in getting the Voting Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed. Anti-miscegenation laws in the United States have been in place in certain states since colonial days. Marriage to a slave was never legal. In the Reconstruction era in 1865, the black codes across the 7 states of the Lower South made intermarriage illegal. The new Republican legislatures in 6 states repealed the restrictive laws. After the Democrats returned to power, the restriction was reimposed. The anti-miscegenation laws were just one of the race-based injustices being questioned during the Civil Rights era. There were movements against the segregation of public schools and transportation systems. Thousands of black and white Americans gathered in the nation's capital to push for change, and leaders began to emerge who would make that change happen.
The case was brought by Mildred Loving and Richard Loving, who had been sentenced to a year in prison in Virginia for marrying each other. Their marriage violated the state's anti-miscegenation statute, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which prohibited the marriage between whites and blacks. So the couple drove north to Washington, D.C. to tie the knot and then returned to their home in Caroline County, Virginia. They'd been married just a few weeks when, in the morning hours of July 11, 1958, Sheriff Garnett Brooks and 2 deputies, acting on an anonymous tip that the Lovings were in violation of the law, stormed into the couple's bedroom. The couple eventually pleaded guilty in violating the Virginia law. To avoid a 1-year jail sentence, the Loving agreed to leave the state. They could return to Virginia, but only separately. They lived in exile in D.C. with their children when Mildred contacted Bernard S. Cohen and Philip J. Hirschkopf, 2 lawyers who are a part of the American Civil Liberties Union.
After reading this letter, they decided to take on the case. Cohen filed a motion to vacate the judgment on the Lovings' original conviction and set aside the sentence. The judge denied his motion because God did not intend for the races to mix. After the Virginia Supreme Court responded with similarly racist sentiments, Cohen and Hirschkopf went to take the case to the U.S. The state compared the anti-miscegenation statutes to the right to prohibit incest, polygamy, and underage marriage.
On contrast, Cohen made a compelling argument using Richard Loving's famous quote: "Tell the court I love my wife, and it is just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia." After a 2-month wait, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of the Lovings on June 12, 1967. The court held that Virginia's anti-miscegenation statute violated both the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment.
The most striking thing about Mildred and Richard Loving is that they never wanted to be known. They didn't want to change history or face down racism. They just wanted to come home to Virginia to be near their families. The tension between government power and individual rights has been a denying feature of American democracy. Richard and Mildred Loving felt they had the right, as other Virginia citizens did, to marry and live together as a family within the state. The state said its racial integrity law superseded those rights. Immediately after the Supreme Court case ended, the Loving family were able to return back to their home in Virginia and live together legally. The decision led to many different races being allowed to marry, such as Native Americans, Asians, Hispanics, African Americans, and Caucasians. We interviewed Leslie Elliott, who is a part of an interracial marriage. Have you previously heard about the Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court case?
Yes, I have. I watched a movie about it about 10 years ago.
Has anyone discriminated against you because of your marriage or tried to end it?
Yes, we were discriminated against a couple of times, or people would just look at us or holler things out, and people did try to end our marriage, yes.
If your love was challenged in the way that the Lovings were, do you think you would be able to fight for it in the Supreme Court?
I would hope that I would. I think what they did is very brave. It was very scary, I'm sure, at the time. I think that I would have done the same thing.
The Loving case led to many states repealing their laws previously put in place to ban interracial marriage, which allowed many couples to marry and finally live together. The Loving case was used as a legal argument in the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges Supreme Court case for same-sex marriage. Chief Justice Earl Warren spoke about the importance of the freedom to marry. Justice Anthony Kennedy used this as an important argument in the case that helped to allow the legalization of interracial marriage.
The social attention the Loving case brought to the world allowed many previous court rulings over interracial marriages to be overturned, and those people were allowed to freely live together finally. More importantly, today, the prohibition against mixed-race marriages has been stripped out of every state constitution.